No nanny lasted more than a month at the Finch estate. No tutor could hold his attention. No therapist could break through the wall of silence that surrounded Alistair Finch. He was one of the richest men in the world, a titan of innovation whose mind had once reshaped the digital landscape, but no amount of money could fix the profound, unyielding silence that had consumed him since his wife's death. He was deaf, a condition he had managed his entire life with sharp intellect and a mastery of lip-reading, but now, enveloped in grief, he had retreated from a world he could no longer bear to see. After firing 7 housekeepers in as many months, his world had shrunk to the cold marble floors of his mansion and the filtered communication of his sole advisor, Marcus Thorne. But then a quiet woman with haunted eyes and a tragic past showed up for an interview. Her name was Clara, and she brought with her a small, silent daughter named Lily. What no one knew was that this little girl, who hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, held the key to unlocking the billionaire's prison. She would do it not with a word, but with a silent gesture during a billion-dollar deal that would not just save Alistair's fortune, but break him completely, shattering the grief-stricken shell to reveal the man he was meant to be. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The Finch mansion was less a home than a mausoleum of memories. Light struggled to penetrate the heavy damask curtains, and the air, meticulously climate-controlled, held the sterile chill of a forgotten museum. Every surface gleamed, a testament to the rotating cast of cleaning staff who polished away every fingerprint, every speck of dust, as if trying to erase any evidence of life itself. For Clara, the silence was the most oppressive feature. It was a heavy, weighted blanket, far different from the quiet peace she shared with her daughter. This was an empty silence, a void where laughter and conversation had once lived and died. Her own life had been shattered by a different kind of silence, the sudden, terrible quiet after the screech of tires, the silence that had followed her husband's last breath and stolen her daughter's voice. Lily hadn't spoken since the accident, her words locked away with the trauma. To reach her, Clara had immersed herself in American Sign Language, their hands creating a private, vibrant world of conversation that no one else could penetrate. Now, that silent language was their sanctuary, a secret garden in a world that had become harsh and loud with loss. She needed this job. The medical bills from the accident had been a mountain, and her meager savings were a valley. The Finch estate paid more than any other domestic position in the state, a salary that could finally provide stability for Lily. So Clara cleaned with a quiet diligence that bordered on invisibility. She learned the geography of Alistair Finch's grief, the untouched side of the massive California king bed, the single-place setting at the vast mahogany dining table, the grand piano in the conservatory, its keys locked under a permanent layer of dust. Mr. Finch himself was a ghost in his own home. A tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the permanent gray of a stormy sea. He moved through the cavernous rooms like a phantom, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. His communication with the world was funneled through one man, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was everything Alistair was not, slick, personable, and perpetually smiling. He managed Mr. Finch's schedule, his finances, his entire existence. He was the gatekeeper, and he made it clear to every staff member that Mr. Finch was not to be disturbed, not to be looked at, and certainly not to be spoken to. All requests went through him. Clara found the arrangement unsettling. She had seen Marcus interpreting for Mr. Finch. His signs were clumsy, rudimentary, like a first-year student showing off a few memorized phrases. He would condense complex discussions with visiting lawyers or accountants into a few broad, sweeping gestures. All good. Sign here? No problems. Alistair would watch, his expression impassive, and give a curt nod. But Clara, a fluent and nuanced speaker of ASL, saw the gaps, the vast empty spaces between what was said and what was conveyed. She saw the laziness, the imprecision. At first, she dismissed it as incompetence, but then came the day in the study. She was dusting the shelves filled with leather-bound books on engineering and quantum physics, a testament to the brilliant mind that now lay dormant. Alistair was at his desk, staring out the French doors at the rain-slicked garden, lost in his world. Two men, Japanese executives from the Sato Corporation, were seated opposite Marcus. They were speaking in urgent, clipped English, their body language tense, agitated. One of them jabbed a finger at a clause in the thick document on the table. "This is unacceptable. We discussed a technology merger, not a complete forfeiture of our intellectual property," he insisted, his voice sharp with anger. Marcus held up a placating hand, smiling his oily smile. "Gentlemen, a misunderstanding, I assure you." He then turned to Alistair, who hadn't moved. Marcus began to sign. He signed the word for partnership. He signed minor details. He signed agreement. His hands moved with a confidence that belied the complete fabrication of his translation. Clara froze, feather duster clutched in her hand. The executive had said forfeiture, a word of total surrender. Marcus had signed partnership. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it stole her breath. As she watched, she saw something she hadn't seen before. A muscle in Alistair Finch's jaw tightened just for a second. A flicker of immense controlled frustration in the depths of his gray eyes before the mask of apathy slid back into place. It was a tiny crack in the facade, but it was enough. Clara realized with a sudden, chilling certainty that Mr. Finch was not oblivious. He was trapped. And the man he trusted most was the one building the walls of his prison, one signed lie at a time. The silence in the house was no longer just empty. It was venomous. Clara moved through the following days with a new sense of purpose, her quiet observation sharpened by a nascent protective instinct. She was no longer just a cleaner, she was a witness. She paid closer attention to the interactions between Alistair and Marcus, seeing them now through the lens of that single glaring deception. The pattern was undeniable. Marcus Thorne operated as a human filter, degrading the quality of information that reached Alistair until it was a pale, distorted shadow of the truth. When a quarterly report detailing a significant loss in a key subsidiary arrived, Clara watched as Marcus flipped through the pages, then turned to Alistair and signed, "Market is stable. Small dip. All expected." He used the sign for small when the figures clearly indicated a hemorrhage. Alistair, seated in his high-backed leather chair, merely nodded, his gaze distant. But Clara saw it again, the subtle tightening of his hands on the armrests, the barest compression of his lips. He knew. He had to know he was being fed platitudes, yet he did nothing. Was it grief that paralyzed him, or was it a deeper, more profound sense of defeat? She saw him in the library often. He wasn't just staring into space. He was reading. His fingers would trace the complex diagrams in books on hypersonic propulsion and advanced materials science. The mind was still there, sharp and hungry, trapped behind a wall of silence and sorrow. He was a king in exile within his own castle, and Marcus was his regent, slowly and methodically usurping the throne. Clara felt a strange kinship with the withdrawn billionaire. She, too, knew what it was to be trapped in silence, to have a world of thought and feeling locked inside with no easy way to let it out. Her connection with Lily was her lifeline. Alistair, it seemed, had none. The inevitable happened one Tuesday afternoon. The woman who usually watched Lily after school called with a fever, her voice raspy and apologetic. Clara had no one else. The agency had a strict no family on premises rule, but the alternative, losing a day's pay or worse the job itself, was unthinkable. With her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, She smuggled Lily in through a service entrance, her small hand clutched tightly in her own. "Now you have to be as quiet as a little mouse, sweetie," she whispered, her hands shaping the words for Lily to see. "You can sit in the kitchen with your drawing pad. Mrs. Gable, the cook, is kind. She won't mind, but you cannot make a sound, and you cannot wander. Do you understand?" Lily looked up at her, her large, expressive brown eyes solemn. She nodded, her grip on her well-loved stuffed rabbit, Barnaby, tightening. She understood the importance of silence better than anyone. For hours the plan worked. Lily was a perfect model of quietude, engrossed in her drawings at a small table in the corner of the cavernous kitchen, occasionally receiving a warm smile and a cookie from the portly cook. Clara went about her duties, her anxiety a low hum beneath the surface of her professional calm. She was finishing the upstairs guest suites when she realized she hadn't checked on Lily in over an hour. A prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. She hurried downstairs, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished marble. The kitchen was empty, save for Mrs. Gable humming over a pot of soup. "Lily?" Clara asked, her voice tight. Mrs. Gable turned. "Oh, the little dear. She took her rabbit and went out the back door a few minutes ago. I thought she was just getting a bit of air." Clara's blood ran cold. The back door led to the sprawling gardens, Alistair Finch's private sanctuary, the one place he was guaranteed to be on a clear afternoon. Panic seized her. She burst through the kitchen door and onto the stone terrace, her eyes scanning the manicured lawns and rose bushes. And then she saw them. At the far end of the garden, near a stone bench shaded by a weeping willow, his late wife's favorite spot, stood Alistair. He was as still as a statue, his back to her. A few feet away from him stood Lily. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She was about to shout, to run, to snatch her daughter away from the forbidden space, but she stopped, frozen by the scene before her. Lily was not making a sound. She was simply standing there, holding Barnaby by one ear. She looked at the towering, somber man, and then, with the unthinking empathy of a child, her small hands came up. She moved them in a simple, graceful gesture. A questioning tilt of the head, fingers tracing the path of a tear down a cheek. The sign for sad. Alistair Finch, who had not flinched at boardroom ambushes or market crashes, visibly recoiled. It was not a large movement, but a sudden, sharp intake of breath, a stiffening of his entire frame. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon the small girl with the stuffed rabbit. His face was a mask of pure shock. For years people had spoken at him, around him, for him. Marcus had butchered a language to feed him lies, but no one, not since his wife, had simply asked. No one had bypassed the wall of his wealth and his grief to see the man inside. This tiny, silent girl had looked at him and seen not a billionaire, but a person who was hurting. Before Clara could move, he took a half step toward Lily. He didn't speak, didn't sign back. He just stared, his gray eyes wide with an emotion Clara couldn't decipher. It was a fragile, sacred moment of pure communication, and Clara felt like an intruder. She finally found her legs and rushed forward, her voice a choked whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Finch. So sorry. She wasn't supposed to. I told her to stay inside." She gently took Lily's hand, pulling her back. "We're leaving. I'm so sorry." She didn't dare look at his face as she hurried her daughter away, expecting the cold fury, the instant dismissal she knew she deserved. But as she glanced back from the doorway, she saw him still standing there, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the spot where the little girl had stood. The silent question still hung in the air between them. The encounter in the garden left Alistair profoundly unsettled. He had spent 2 years cultivating a state of emotional numbness, a protective shell of apathy that insulated him from the sharp edges of his grief. The world had become a silent movie he watched from a great distance, its colors muted, its actors remote. Marcus's clumsy signing was part of that defense. It was simple, undemanding, and kept genuine human connection at bay. But the little girl, Lily, had pierced that shell with a single silent question. Sad? It was so direct, so pure. It wasn't pitying or intrusive. It was a simple observation, an invitation. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. The shock of it echoed within him long after Clara had whisked the child away. He found himself replaying the moment, the small, hesitant hands, the earnest expression in her eyes, the worn rabbit clutched in her fist. It was a flicker of light in his monochrome existence. He did not fire Clara. To Marcus's surprise, he didn't even mention the incident. Instead, a seed of curiosity was planted in the barren soil of his mind. He began to watch them. From the high window of his study that overlooked the kitchens and service entrance, he saw Clara and Lily arrive the next morning. He watched as they stood by her car, having a rapid, fluid conversation with their hands. Lily's hands danced, describing something with youthful excitement. Clara's responded with warmth and gentle amusement. It was a symphony of silence, a complete, vibrant world of communication that was utterly alien to him. He compared it to Marcus's perfunctory, almost insulting gestures. Eat now, meeting soon, sign this. He had accepted that as his reality, a crude pidgin version of a language he had once shared fluently with his wife, who had learned ASL as a beautiful act of love. Seeing the girl and her mother, he was reminded of what he had lost, not just his wife, but the very essence of connection. The next afternoon, driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand, he walked into the garden. He didn't go to the willow bench, but instead busied himself inspecting the prize-winning rose bushes his wife had so lovingly tended, now maintained by a team of gardeners who worked with reverent quiet. He knew, with a strange certainty, that the girl would be there, and she was. A short while later, the kitchen door opened and Lily stepped out, this time with her mother, hovering anxiously behind her. Clara saw him and immediately tried to steer Lily back inside. "Mr. Finch, I apologize again for yesterday," she started, her voice barely a whisper. Alistair raised a hand, a gesture that clearly meant stop. He held Clara's gaze for a moment, then deliberately looked past her to Lily, who was hiding behind her mother's legs, clutching Barnaby the rabbit. He crouched down slowly, an act that felt foreign and creaky to his own body. He met the little girl's wide, curious eyes. Hesitantly, his fingers stiff from disuse, he formed a question in the air. He pointed to the stuffed animal. "Your rabbit? What? Name?" Lily peeked out from behind her mother. She looked at Alistair's hands, then up at his face. There was no anger there, only a quiet, waiting stillness. Her fear seemed to melt away. Her own small hands came up, and with a clarity that surprised him, she signed back. "Barnaby." She spelled it out carefully. Then she added the sign for friend. Alistair felt a jolt, a genuine, forgotten warmth spreading through his chest. It was the first real, unmediated conversation he'd had with another human being in 2 years. It was simple, trivial, and yet it felt monumental. He signed again, a bit more smoothly this time. "He is a good friend," Lily nodded enthusiastically, a shy smile finally gracing her lips. She signed, "He is very brave." Clara watched from the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. This was impossible. The reclusive, formidable Alistair Finch, a man feared and mythologized in the business world, was on his knees in the dirt, having a silent conversation with her daughter about a stuffed rabbit. The ice around him wasn't just cracking, it was beginning to melt. The fragile hope she had felt was solidifying into something tangible, something real. For a moment the three of them existed in a small, silent bubble of understanding, the rest of the vast, empty mansion fading into irrelevance. It was a breakthrough, a quiet miracle unfolding in a garden of ghosts. The clandestine meetings in the garden became a tentative ritual. Every afternoon, weather permitting, Alistair would find a reason to be among the roses, and a short time later, Lily, with Clara's nervous blessing, would appear. Their conversations were simple, childlike, and for Alistair, they were life-giving. Lily would tell him about her day at school, about the colors she used in her paintings, about the funny shape of a cloud. She asked him questions no one else dared. "Why are the flowers sad?" she signed one day, pointing to a patch of drooping tulips. Alistair, surprised, found himself signing back, "They miss the sun." It was the most poetic thing he had expressed in years. Through Lily, he began to re-engage with the world around him, to notice the small details he had long since blocked out. The child's innocent, unfiltered communication was a clean spring washing away the muddy, tainted information he received from Marcus. He started to feel a flicker of his old self, the man who built an empire on observation and precision, returning. This fragile new reality, however, could not remain a secret for long. Marcus Thorne, ever vigilant in his role as warden, noticed the change in his employer. Alistair seemed less lethargic, more present. There was a new light in his eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there a week ago. Marcus attributed it to a new medication Dr. Evans had prescribed, but he remained suspicious. His opportunity to discover the source of this change came one Thursday. He was returning to the mansion unexpectedly to retrieve a file when he glanced out a hallway window that overlooked the gardens. The sight below made him stop dead. There was Finch, his billionaire charge, kneeling on the grass. Opposite him was the maid's little girl. Their hands were moving, weaving stories in the air. It was an intimate, focused conversation, a world from which he was completely excluded. Rage, cold and sharp, flooded him. This was a breach of protocol, a contamination. This quiet, insignificant woman and her strange, mute child were interfering, breaking through the careful walls of isolation he had spent years constructing. He didn't hesitate. He stormed down the corridor and burst through the French doors onto the terrace, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet garden. Clara, who had been watching from a respectful distance, jumped. Lily shrank back, startled by the sudden angry noise. Alistair rose slowly to his full height, his expression unreadable. Marcus marched toward Clara, his face a mask of fury. "I gave you explicit instructions. You are staff. Your job is to be invisible. You are not to interact with Mr. Finch, and you certainly are not to bring your child here to bother him. You are fired. Get your things and get off this property immediately," he was shouting, his spittle flying. He was so consumed by his rage that he didn't notice Alistair walking up behind him. He didn't see the dangerous glint in the billionaire's eyes. Marcus was so used to Alistair being a passive observer that he made a fatal error. He forgot that Alistair could still see. He could still read lips. As Marcus turned to grab Clara's arm, Alistair stepped between them. He was a formidable presence, his height and sheer stillness commanding attention. He looked down at Marcus, his face like carved granite. Then his hands came up, not in the hesitant way he signed with Lily, but with a speed and precision that was chilling. The signs were sharp, cutting, each movement a blade. "You will not speak to her that way?" Marcus froze, his mouth agape. He had never seen Alistair sign with such ferocity. "She stays," Alistair continued, his fingers jabbing the air for emphasis. "You are dismissed for the day. Go now." The command was absolute. There was no room for argument. Marcus stared, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. He had been so sure of his control. In a single moment, it had evaporated. Humiliated and seething, he turned on his heel and stalked away without another word. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Alistair watched him go, his chest heaving with an adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. He then turned to Clara, who was pale and trembling, holding a frightened Lily in her arms. His expression softened. He pulled a small notepad and a pen from his jacket pocket, a tool he hadn't used in months, preferring the isolation of Marcus's interpretations. He wrote quickly, his handwriting a strong, decisive script. "He is a liar." He showed it to Clara. Her eyes widened. He wrote again. "Your daughter, she signs the truth. Marcus does not." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. He was taking a monumental leap of faith, trusting this woman he barely knew over the man who had been his shadow for 5 years. Finally, he wrote the words that would change everything. "I need your help. I cannot trust him. There is a large deal, the Sato Corporation. I believe he is trying to trick me. Will you help me?" Clara looked from the words on the page to the desperate hope in the billionaire's eyes. And in that moment, she was no longer just a maid. She was an ally. She nodded. The alliance forged in the garden was a fragile, secret thing. Alistair, for the first time in years, had an ally within the walls of his own home, someone who could see and hear the world for him without distortion. Clara, driven by a fierce sense of justice and a burgeoning affection for the lonely man, accepted the dangerous task. Her position as housekeeper, once a mark of her lowly status, now became her greatest asset. She could move through the mansion unquestioned, her presence so commonplace it was invisible. Alistair's instructions were simple and delivered via handwritten notes passed in secret. "Find the original Sato contract, the one in Japanese and English. Marcus keeps it in his office here. He only shows me his signed summaries." Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she began her search. Marcus's office, a lavishly appointed suite on the ground floor, was usually locked. But as part of her duties, she had a master key for cleaning purposes. She had to be meticulous, timing her searches for when Marcus was out of the house, and Alistair had confirmed his schedule. She started with the obvious places, the desk drawers, the filing cabinets. They were all filled with routine corporate documents, nothing related to the Sato deal. The real files, the incriminating ones, were clearly kept somewhere more secure. While Clara conducted her covert investigation, an entirely different kind of discovery was happening elsewhere in the mansion. The bond between Alistair and Lily deepened with each passing day. He found himself looking forward to their silent afternoon conversations. Her presence was a balm to his wounded soul. She wasn't afraid of his silence or his grief. She treated him not as a titan of industry or a tragic figure, but simply as a friend. He began to show her parts of his world he had kept locked away. One afternoon he led her into his private workshop, a place no one, not even Marcus, had entered since his wife's passing. It was a wonderland of technology, half-assembled engines, holographic schematics shimmering in the air, complex blueprints spread across vast tables. This was the sanctum of the innovator, the genius who had changed the world. Lily's eyes grew wide with wonder. She pointed to a detailed drawing of a sleek, futuristic aircraft. "You made this?" she signed. Alistair nodded. "It is a design for a hypersonic jet. It can fly from New York to Tokyo in 2 hours. Lily's hands flew as she asked question after question. How does it work? What are the wings made of? Can it fly to the moon? Alistair, for the first time in a long time, smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. He spent the next hour explaining the principles of aerodynamics and material science to a 7-year-old girl using gestures and sketches, and he felt more alive, more himself, than he had in years. Lily was not just a communication channel. She was a bridge back to his own passion, his own identity. Meanwhile, Clara's search was growing more desperate. She knew the Sato signing was imminent. Marcus had mentioned it was happening at the mansion in a few days. Time was running out. She returned to his office, determined to search every inch. Her eyes fell on a row of antique leather-bound books on a high shelf. They looked purely decorative, but one of them, a copy of The Art of War, seemed slightly askew. On a hunch, she climbed the library ladder and pulled it down. It was surprisingly light. It wasn't a book at all. It was a hollowed-out safe. Her fingers trembled as she worked the small hidden latch. It clicked open. Inside was not a set of files, but a single, locked black briefcase. Her heart sank. It would require another key. She was about to give up when her fingers brushed against something taped to the inside lid of the book safe. A small silver key. With bated breath, she used it to unlock the briefcase. The contents confirmed all of their worst fears. There were 2 contracts. The first was the official document, a thick sheaf of papers in English and Japanese. Even with her limited knowledge of corporate law, Clara could see that the language was predatory. Words like asset forfeiture, patent transferred, and full acquisition jumped out at her. The second document was a 2-page summary in English, written in simple, clear terms. It spoke of strategic partnership, technology sharing, and joint venture. It was signed at the bottom with a forgery of the Sato CEO's signature. This was the document Marcus had been showing Alistair. But there was something else, something even more sinister. Tucked at the bottom of the briefcase was a file containing correspondence between Marcus Thorne and Dr. Lawrence Evans, Alistair's personal physician. She read the letters, her blood turning to ice. Alistair's cognitive decline is progressing, as we discussed, one letter from Dr. Evans read. His withdrawal and periods of dissociation are clear indicators of early-onset dementia. I am prepared to testify to his incompetence. Daddy. Another from Marcus replied, "The Sato deal will be the final piece of evidence. The catastrophic failure of that division under his watch will make our petition for a conservatorship undeniable." It was all there in black and white. A cold, calculated plot to strip a man of his mind, his legacy, and his freedom. Clara carried the briefcase to Alistair's study as if it were a venomous snake. She laid the documents out on the vast expanse of his mahogany desk, her hands shaking so badly she could barely separate the pages. Alistair stood beside her, his face a mask of calm, but she could see the storm gathering in his eyes as he read. He started with the 2 contracts, his gaze flicking back and forth between the predatory original and the fraudulent summary. A muscle in his jaw pulsed, a single, violent twitch in his otherwise still face. The scope of the financial betrayal was staggering, a deliberate act of industrial sabotage designed to cripple the crown jewel of his empire. But it was the second file, the letters between Marcus and Dr. Evans, that finally shattered his composure. He read the clinical, damning words describing his supposed cognitive decline, the medical justification for the theft of his life, his grief, his withdrawal, his silence. They had taken the very symptoms of his heartbreak and weaponized them, twisting them into a diagnosis that would render him a prisoner, with Marcus holding the key. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, charged with the force of his silent rage. He picked up a letter from Dr. Evans, his hand trembling slightly. For a moment Clara thought he might rip it to shreds, that the dam of his control would finally break. Instead, he placed it back on the desk with unnerving gentleness. The grief that had paralyzed him for 2 years was being burned away by a clean, white-hot fury. The fog was lifting, not to reveal the gentle light of healing, but the harsh, clarifying glare of war. He saw it all now, the staff turnover that had isolated him, leaving him surrounded by strangers loyal only to Marcus, the way Marcus discouraged visitors, citing Alistair's fragility, the subtle, constant infantilization. He had been a frog in a pot of slowly boiling water, and he had nearly been cooked. He looked up from the documents, his gray eyes no longer clouded with sorrow, but shining with a hard, dangerous light. He met Clara's gaze, and in that moment she saw the titan of industry that had been dormant for so long. He was awake. He strode to a different desk, one that held a sophisticated TTY communication device and a state-of-the-art computer, both of which had been gathering dust. He sat down, his movements precise and economical. He looked at Clara, and his hands began to move, not with the gentle cadence he used with Lily, but with the sharp, decisive authority of a general issuing commands. The final signing meeting for the Sato deal is tomorrow here at 10 a.m. His signs were clipped, powerful. They are walking into a trap. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, conveying the weight of his next words. I need you there, both of you, you and Lily. Oh, Clara felt a jolt of fear. Me? Lily? Mr. Finch? What could we possibly do? Lily is just a child. Alistair's expression was unyielding. Marcus will be here to interpret. He will tell his lies, but he will not be the only one speaking the language. The plan began to form in his mind, audacious and brilliant. He needed more than just a translator. He needed an unimpeachable source of truth. He needed the innocence and clarity that only a child could provide. He signed again, his determination absolute. Lily will not be just a witness, she will be my voice. Marcus felt the shift in the atmosphere of the mansion. The quiet was no longer passive and sorrowful. It was coiled, watchful. Alistair was different. He was polite, almost serene, but there was a new, unsettling stillness about him, the calm at the center of a hurricane. Marcus's instincts, honed by years of manipulation, screamed that something was wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew it had to do with the maid, Clara. He'd seen Alistair pass her a note in the hallway. He'd seen the way Alistair now looked at her, with a level of trust and reliance that Marcus had believed was reserved only for him. He was losing control, and with the Sato deal just a day away, he couldn't afford any loose ends. He had to remove her, permanently. His plan was cruel in its simplicity. He knew Clara was scrupulously honest, which would make the accusation of theft all the more devastating and believable. That evening, while Clara and Lily were in the kitchen having dinner with Mrs. Gable, Marcus slipped into the master suite. He went to the velvet-lined jewelry box on the late Mrs. Finch's vanity, a piece of furniture Alistair hadn't been able to bring himself to remove. He selected a specific piece, a sapphire and diamond necklace, famous for being one of Alistair's first major gifts to his wife. Its value was immense, but its sentimental worth was incalculable. It was the perfect weapon. He then went to the small locker room where the day staff kept their belongings. Clara's worn tote bag was on a hook. With a grim satisfaction, he pushed the necklace deep into the bag's side pocket, underneath a crumpled pack of tissues. An hour later, as Clara was preparing to leave, Marcus made his move. He strode into the grand hall where the remaining staff were gathered, his face a mask of theatrical distress. "The sapphire necklace is gone," he announced, his voice ringing with false panic. "Mrs. Finch's blue diamond necklace. It's missing from the master suite." A wave of gasps and murmurs went through the staff. Marcus let the tension build before turning his gaze, full of feigned reluctance, upon Clara. "I don't want to believe it, but you were the only one assigned to clean the suite today, Clara." Clara's face went white. "What? No. I would never—" "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding," Marcus said smoothly, cutting her off. "Let's just clear this up. If you would just allow us to look in your bag—" Humiliation washed over Clara as all eyes turned to her. Knowing she was innocent but trapped, she numbly handed her bag over. Marcus made a show of searching it carefully before his hand stopped in the side pocket. He pulled out the glittering necklace, holding it up for all to see. The diamonds caught the light, seeming to mock her with their brilliance. "I'm so disappointed, Clara," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false sorrow. "I'll have to call the police." The arrival of the police car, its lights flashing silently in the twilight, was the final crushing blow. Clara stood in the marble foyer, tears streaming down her face as two officers questioned her. She denied everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. From his study window, Alistair saw the flashing lights painting surreal strokes of red and blue across the manicured lawns. A cold dread gripped him. He hurried downstairs to find chaos in his foyer. Marcus intercepted him before he could reach the officers, his hands moving in a flurry of agitated signs. "Clara, caught stealing. Your wife's necklace. Police are handling it. A terrible business. Don't worry." He tried to guide Alistair back toward the stairs to shield him from the ugly scene. For a split second, Alistair hesitated. The betrayal he had uncovered was so profound, it had made him question everything. Could he have been wrong about her? Was this whole thing a more complex game than he had imagined? Doubt, like a poison, seeped into his resolve. It was Lily who broke the spell. Seeing her mother crying, surrounded by uniformed officers, the trauma that had stolen her voice threatened to overwhelm her. But then she saw Alistair's face. His flicker of uncertainty and a different instinct took over, the fierce, protective love of a daughter. She broke away from Mrs. Gable's comforting embrace and ran to Alistair, tugging frantically on his trousers. He looked down into her tear-streaked face. Her little hands flew up, signing with a desperate, frantic energy that tore at his heart. "Mommy no do it. Mean man, I saw. He put shiny thing in bag. I saw him." She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus. The accusation was so pure, so absolute, it was like a lightning bolt in the charged room. Alistair looked from Lily's terrified, determined face to Marcus, whose smug expression had faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. The child had no reason to lie. Marcus had every reason. The last vestiges of doubt in Alistair's mind vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He had his truth, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The child, her duty done, hid behind Alistair's legs, her small body trembling. The brief regression was a reminder of her fragility, and it only hardened his resolve to protect her and her mother. Alistair Finch moved with a speed and decisiveness that stunned everyone in the foyer. The passive, grief-stricken recluse was gone, replaced by the formidable commander of a global empire. He stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Lily's head, and fixed the two police officers with an imperious glare. He pulled out his notepad and pen, his script a furious slash across the page. He handed the note to the senior officer. The officer read it, his eyes widening. "I am Alistair Finch. This is a gross misunderstanding. Clara is my personal assistant and a guest in my home. The necklace was a gift I had intended for her daughter. You will release her immediately. My legal team will be in contact with your superiors in the morning to discuss this harassment." The authority in the written words was absolute. The officers, caught between a clear-cut theft and the wrath of one of the world's most powerful men, made a swift calculation. They exchanged a look, mumbled apologies, and released Clara's arm. The threat of Alistair's lawyers was far more terrifying than a simple jewelry theft. Marcus watched his scheme crumble into dust. The look on his face was a rhapsody of thwarted ambition and rising panic. He had overplayed his hand, and in doing so, had shown Alistair exactly how ruthless he was willing to be. There was no going back now. He had declared war, and Alistair was now fully armed and on the field. As the police departed, Alistair turned to Marcus. He didn't sign. He didn't write a note. He simply gave him a look of such cold contempt that Marcus physically flinched. Then Alistair turned his back on him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and gently guided Clara and a still-shaken Lily toward the grand staircase. "You and Lily will stay in the east guest wing tonight," he wrote on his pad for Clara. "You are not safe until this is over." That night the mansion buzzed with a silent energy. Alistair, sequestered in his study, became a whirlwind of activity. The dusty TTY device crackled to life as he communicated with his top legal counsel, a brilliant, ruthless woman named Eleanor Vance, whom Marcus had systematically sidelined for years. Emails flew from his keyboard, their contents encrypted and urgent. He was reactivating his network, calling in favors, and marshaling his vast resources. Eleanor's team began a deep dive into Marcus Thorne, Dr. Lawrence Evans, and the board members of the Sato Corporation. They worked through the night, uncovering a web of shell corporations, secret bank accounts, and a history of shady dealings that pointed to a long-planned conspiracy. Alistair was not just defending himself, he was building a cage for his enemies. He worked until the first rays of dawn painted the sky, then went to check on Clara and Lily. He found them asleep in one of the lavish guest suites. Lily curled up beside her mother, her hand clutching Barnaby the rabbit. Clara's face, even in sleep, was etched with the strain of the previous night. He felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled him. These two people had wandered into his life and accidentally saved him from his own apathy. He owed them everything. He returned to his study and began to prepare for the 10 a.m. meeting. He laid out his strategy with the precision of a chess grandmaster. He knew what Marcus and the Sato executives expected, a broken, confused old man easily manipulated, ready to sign away his legacy. They had no idea they were about to face the dragon they had foolishly awakened. He found Clara a few hours later, awake and watching the sun rise. He handed her a note. "The plan is in motion. I have one more thing to ask of Lily. It is the most important part. Is she strong enough?" Clara looked at her daughter, who was now awake and watching them, her eyes full of a child's unwavering trust. Clara nodded. "She is stronger than any of us." Alistair then knelt before Lily. He signed to her slowly, seriously. "Today, some bad men are coming. They think I am weak because I cannot hear. They think they can trick me. I need you to be my ears. I need you to be my voice. Can you be brave for me?" Lily looked at her mother, then back at the billionaire who had become her friend. She didn't hesitate. She nodded, her small face set with a gravity beyond her years. She signed back a single, powerful word. Yes. The boardroom was a study in tension. Polished mahogany reflected the grim faces of the Sato Corporation executives and their lawyers. Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the table, exuding a smug confidence. He had recovered from the previous night's debacle, convincing himself it was a minor setback. In a few minutes, the deal would be signed. Alistair's fate would be sealed, and he would be untouchable. Dr. Evans was also present, seated discreetly in a corner, his presence lending a false air of medical necessity to the proceedings. He was there to observe Alistair's confused state and document it for the future conservatorship hearing. They were a pack of wolves, circling, ready for the kill. The doors opened, and Alistair Finch entered. He was dressed not in his usual soft loungewear, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his formidable stature. His face was calm, his eyes clear and sharp. The change was so dramatic that a murmur went through the room, but it was his companions who caused the real shock. At his side was the maid, Clara, her expression resolute, and holding his other hand was her small daughter, Lily, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Marcus scoffed, stepping forward. He signed to Alistair with theatrical exasperation. "Alistair, this is a serious business meeting. Why are the help and their child here? It is highly inappropriate. Send them out." Alistair completely ignored him. He took his seat at the head of the table, placing Lily in the chair directly to his right, and gesturing for Clara to stand behind them. The message was clear. They were with him. The lead Sato executive, a stern man named Mr. P. Tanaka, cleared his throat, impatient to begin. "Shall we finalize the terms, Mr. Finch? As we are all aware, this is the final step in our strategic merger." Marcus stepped up, ready to perform his role as interpreter. "Of course," Mr. Tanaka continued, "the key point is the immediate transfer of the entire Finch Innovations patent portfolio, at which point Finch Innovations will be fully absorbed into the Sato global structure." He spoke the words with finality, the death sentence for Alistair's company. Marcus turned to Alistair, his hands beginning to form the familiar deceitful signs. He signed, "We will partner on new patents. Our companies will grow together. Stop. The word came not from Alistair, but from Clara, spoken softly, but with such authority that Marcus froze, his hand still in the air. Alistair held up a single finger, a silent command for everyone to wait. He then turned his full attention to Lily. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. The room watched, utterly baffled, as Mr. Tanaka, annoyed by the interruption, repeated himself. As I said, the complete transfer of the patent portfolio and the full absorption of the company. As he spoke, Lily's eyes were fixed on his face. She watched his lips, his expressions, the subtle shifts in his posture. The moment he finished speaking, her small hands began to move. They flew with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. There was no hesitation, no childish simplification. She signed verbatim, with perfect grammatical structure, the brutal truth of his words. Complete transfer patent portfolio, full absorption of company. The deception was instantly, irrevocably exposed. The chasm between Marcus's lie and Lily's truth was laid bare for the entire room to see. Marcus's face turned the color of ash. The Sato executives exchanged panicked glances. Dr. Evans seemed to shrink in his chair. Alistair's eyes, cold as ice, locked onto Marcus. He stood up slowly, drawing himself to his full height. His hands rose, and he began to sign, not to one person, but to the entire room, his movements large, sharp, and undeniable. Through Clara, who now spoke his signed words aloud for the hearing members of the room, his voice finally thundered through the mansion. "Marcus Thorne," Clara translated, her voice ringing with vindication, "you are fired for conspiracy and fraud. Dr. Evans, my lawyers have already filed a complaint with the medical board. You will be lucky to practice medicine anywhere, ever, again." He then turned his gaze to the stunned Sato executives. "Gentlemen, your insulting proposal is rejected. My legal team is currently filing charges of industrial espionage and corporate fraud against your company. Security will see you out." Panic erupted. The lawyers began shuffling papers. The executives started speaking in hushed, frantic Japanese. In the midst of the chaos, Alistair held up a hand for silence. He pointed a finger not at Mr. Tanaka, but at a younger junior executive who had looked deeply uncomfortable throughout the entire meeting. Alistair signed again, with Clara and Lily translating in tandem, a dual force of truth. "Your company's leadership is corrupt, but you have honor. Tell them my counteroffer. I will buy your failing micropropulsion division for $1 billion. It is a generous offer that will save your company from the scandal that is about to break. You have 1 hour to accept." The junior executive, seeing his chance to salvage a disaster and oust his corrupt superiors, didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and walked to the corner of the room. The power had shifted completely. Alistair Finch was back on his throne, and at his side, the quiet maid and her silent daughter stood as his most powerful queen and princess. 6 months later, the Finch mansion was unrecognizable. The heavy curtains had been replaced with light, airy fabrics that allowed sunlight to stream in, illuminating rooms that were no longer silent and sterile. The sound of quiet laughter could sometimes be heard from the kitchen, and Lily's colorful drawings were held by magnets to the door of the industrial-sized refrigerator. The garden, once a place of somber reflection, now featured a small, custom-built playhouse near the willow tree. Life had returned to the mausoleum. The fallout from the disastrous Sato meeting had been swift and brutal. Marcus Thorne and Dr. Evans were entangled in a massive legal battle, their conspiracy exposed in a series of scathing articles in the financial press. The scandal had rocked the corporate world, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. The Sato Corporation, eager to avoid further disgrace, had accepted Alistair's aggressive counteroffer, a deal that had proven to be one of the most brilliant strategic acquisitions of the decade. Alistair Finch was not just back, he was more powerful and respected than ever. The man himself was transformed. The grief for his wife had not vanished, but it no longer defined him. It had settled into a place of honored memory, no longer a suffocating shroud. He ran his empire with a renewed vigor and a new perspective. He had a team of professional ASL interpreters for his business dealings, but his most important conversations still happened with his hands in the quiet spaces of his home. He had also launched the Lily Finch Foundation, a global initiative dedicated to promoting deaf education and providing resources for children with communication disorders. He had found a new purpose, a way to turn his own silent struggle into a voice for thousands. Clara was no longer the maid. The pretense had been dropped within days of the confrontation. She was now the official head of the household, but her true role was far deeper. She was Alistair's partner, his confidant, his anchor. The unspoken bond between them, forged in secrecy and crisis, had blossomed into a quiet, profound love built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of loss and recovery. They were a family, unconventional but unbreakable. The culmination of this new life came at the inaugural gala for the foundation. The grand ballroom was filled with philanthropists, business leaders, and educators, all gathered to support the cause. Alistair, Clara, and Lily stood on a small stage, a portrait of a modern family. When it was time for Alistair to speak, he stepped to the podium. Two large screens flanked the stage. Instead of a live interpreter, the screens showed a beautifully filmed video of Alistair and Lily sitting in their garden signing his speech together. As Alistair signed to the live audience, his powerful, graceful movements were mirrored by Lily on the screen, her youthful energy a perfect complement to his steady gravitas. "Silence is not emptiness," Clara's voice read the speech aloud, a narration over the video. "It can be a prison, or it can be a canvas. We are taught to fear silence, to fill it with noise. But I have learned that the most important things are often communicated without a single sound." He spoke of his own journey, of being lost in a fog of grief, and of how the simple, honest communication of a child had been the lighthouse that guided him home. He finished his speech, and the ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Alistair looked away from the crowd, his gaze finding Clara and Lily in the front row. The noise of the ovation faded into the background. He looked at them, his eyes full of a love and gratitude that needed no words. He raised his hands and signed, just for them, "My family." It served as a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices or square footage, but in the simple, profound courage it takes to break the silence and truly listen. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoyed this story, and please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We always love to hear from you.